that line, and it is as specified in the return info cell, then we execute the statement. But when we execute this statement, which is specified by column G15, by the time we execute the statement, column G and column H are already deallocated. Okay? Now with those two deallocated, this N cannot be referring to column H. It has to be referring to column F because column F is the one that has a label of N, that has the local, the passback value parameter N. So that's why we use this 2 here, 2 minus 2 is 0, and that's why when we invoke it again, we specify H to have a value of 0. Okay, is that okay? I know this can be confusing. You know, it's a very kind of this is at this point this is the best the best way I can explain it. Is that all right so far with this class? Okay. So let's move on and continue the execution, this time at row 22. Now this is one thing that I personally think is great about tracing like this, is because I can leave the trace off at any particular time. I can come back, look at the last part of the trace and continue on with that at any time. So right now we are on line 8. Okay, this is row 22 of the trace, but we are executing the code on line 8 of the pseudocode. The return info turns out to be line 8 as well, but don't let that bother you. Remember that? Okay, whatever the return info cell has, don't let it bother you when you execute a return statement, because your job as a return statement is just to change the question mark into whatever value that you're returning. Okay, we are returning 1 in this case on line 8 because that is what this is returning. Okay, because line 8 looks like this at this point, and 1 plus 0 is 1. So effectively, we are executing return 1. Return 1 is going to copy and paste the return info cell and then replace the question mark with a 1. Are we doing okay so far to reestablish the context from Tuesday? Okay. After we execute line 8, we are done with the conditional statement. So we go all the way to line 10. Line 10 is the end of a subroutine, which means we have to deallocate the 2 columns that we allocated for this invocation. And then we continue execution based on the return info cell. The return info cell E22 tells us that we have to go back to line 8 again. And line 8 this time looks like return 1 plus invoke f n minus 2 goes to n. But remember, column E and column F are deallocated already at this point. So the n cannot be referring to column F. It has to be referring to column D. Now I know this is a little bit of a hassle, but column D has a value of 3. So that means 3 minus 2 is 1. We are back to line 8. We're back to line 8, and this time when we invoke again, we are going to set up the return info cell again, and this time we are still on line 8, except line 8 looks like return 1 plus open paren, question mark, and the close paren. That's because at this point we are now taking care of this particular invocation, and that's why we are allocating a column for return info again. We have to remember to set up n again, because this time it also has a parameter n. Except this time n has a value of what? 1. N has a value of 1 because 3 minus 2 is 1. Are we okay so far? Okay. Now after we set all this up, we are ready to go continue execution in the subroutine. The first line that has any action to do is line 3 in the subroutine. So we're back to line 3 here. Line 3 has to evaluate a condition. N equals to 0 is false because n equals to 1. Then we move on to line 5. Line 5 asks another question. N equals to 1 is true because n does equal to 1. Then we proceed to go to line 6. Line 6 is return 1. So what we do is we go to the return info cell, copy, paste it, replace the question mark with whatever value I'm supposed to be returning, which turns out to be 1. But remember, at this point, I'm only resolving what the question mark should be. I am not executing line 8 at this point. I'm executing line 6. Are we okay so far? Okay. Because it is very important to differentiate which line am I executing and what is that line resolving at that point. So line 8 is the line being resolved, but it does not execute because we are on line 6 at this point. After line 6, we don't have anything else to do in the conditional statement, and as a result, we end up on line 10. It's the other way. On line 10, we are at the end of a subroutine, which means the 2 columns that we allocated earlier now have to be deallocated. Once they're deallocated, I don't have f as n anymore, and instead, we have to go back to line 8 because return info is telling me to go back to line 8. Except line 8 does not look like line 8 in the pseudocode anymore. Line 8 is now effectively returning 1 plus 1. 1 plus 1 is only 2, right? So this is effectively, so when we get back to line 8, we are effectively executing return 2. There's nothing else to resolve at this point. Okay, so now we have to change the context back to line 8, but now column C and column D are our context. We are executing the statement as stated in E28, but the context to execute that statement is column C and column D. Okay? Return 2 means that we have to copy and paste the return info cell, which is column C in this case, find out where the question mark is, and replace it with 1 plus 1, which is simply 2. Now, once again, we are only resolving what the question mark is supposed to be. We are not executing line 11 at this point. We are executing line 8. After line 8, we go to line 10. Then once again, we deallocate the columns that we allocated for this invocation. And then we continue execution based on return info. The return info tells me to go back to line 11, and that's where we're going back. But this time on line 11, the invocation is now fully resolved to a particular value of 2, and that's exactly what we're doing. It's just to print the constant of 2 to the screen or on a piece of paper, and then we are done. Yep.
We have on the test a recursion, column 2 recursions in it in the same return value?
I don't know yet. I have made the mistake of saying something in the class and then I forgot about it and I asked questions about it and students were not happy about it. So instead of making promises that I will break later on, making people unhappy, I just won't make any promises. Stuff that you learn as a parent. But Dad, you promised that you're going to buy. No. Yep.
I don't understand why you're using the same column for all of the return line number 8. Because you said that you had to make a new column for each one.
Correct. Now, it's because it is deallocated at this point, then I can reallocate it right after that.
So it's like it's blank, basically?
It's kind of like in the recycle bin. Okay, if you think about it as a book, okay, you have a little bookmark to tell you which part of the notebook is in use at any particular time. So when we use this symbol, or when we use this notation, it is simply saying that at this point, column E and column F are free again. They can be allocated again. So that means immediately after row 23 of the trace, on row 24, if I need any additional columns, I can reuse those columns right away. Is that okay? And that's one of the mistakes that people have made in the by-val, by-ref homework assignment. Some people made kind of a slight mistake. I did not take a whole lot of points off. Was not to reuse columns that are deallocated. In other words, some people move it all the way out, even though they could have reused, two columns. They used, some additional columns. I took just as a token, like 5 points off from 40 points, because I just wrote a note, as a feedback as well, and tell those particular people and say you should have reused column H and column G, because by the time you get to these rows in the trace, they are already deallocated. You should have been reusing those columns instead. But did I answer the question? Okay. Okay, so this is a particularly interesting program to trace. But if you don't want anything this complicated, which is, it's kind of complicated, but really not much more than the one in the notes. If you don't want anything that is too complicated, the best way to learn how to specify a return value and get your homework assignment done is to look at the notes, read the notes, particularly section 7.3, returning to a return statement is going to describe, basically what you need to know to get the current homework assignment done. Okay, and it is due on next Wednesday before midnight, or 5 minutes before midnight, which means the last chance to ask any questions about the homework is going to be next Tuesday when we meet. Okay, so I strongly advise people to get started on this one as quickly as possible, just so that you can see whether you can do it. If you have questions, you need some clarifications, we have next Tuesday to do all the clarifications. Okay, because we are moving into topics that are a little bit more abstract, and the operations are a little bit more difficult to follow, but it is kind of important to get through these topics too. Any questions about the Fibonacci trace? Because that's basically what we did last time, and we finished it up today. If there are no questions, I will save it into today's folder. In other words, you will find this in Tuesday's folder as well as today's folder, but the one in today's folder is all done, it's all finished. Today is the 18th? Yep. I also think that for topics like this, reviewing the YouTube clips may be helpful, because if you just read the notes, it is very static. Okay, it kind of shows you, okay, what we are doing on this row of a trace. If I just go here, okay, I have I try to explain as much as I can what happens on row 12 of the trace. But when you look at the video clip, it shows you exactly, in which order do I specify, the cells and also the full audio explanation at the time. So I think the video clip can be helpful too. Has anyone checked out the video clips? No? Okay.
It's really useful.
It's the same thing as in the class, except, you don't actually get to see me walking around, you just hear my voice. But I think that the essence of the class and the concepts is still there. Yep.
I actually want to ask why you don't wear that microphone anymore.
Because it's cumbersome. Is the sound quality better with that thing, or with this? Okay.
I think when you don't wear it, because I was watching it earlier today,
Mm-hmm.
you start walking away, it starts fading out a little bit.
Yep.
I mean, you can still hear you, but it's just it's a little.
Okay. I have this thing set to AGC, automatic gain control, which means when I walk away, if I had it turned off, it would actually fade away even more. It's already amplifying when I walk away to kind of compensate for the attenuation. The problem with the wearable microphone is the sound quality, at least to me, does not seem to be as good. But if the fading away part is bothering you guys more so than the actual sound quality, I can use that one